Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Tuesday evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 22nd of September now. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information for your community and your village, whatever part of Alaska you're in. The Weather Service serves your forecast and weather observation needs by going to weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov. You can always give us a call on the weather info line at 800-472-0391, and during the day find information about the weather in your area by going to Facebook at facebook.com/NWS Alaska. Today you'll find an announcement where we're asking for your help to become a weather spotter, and it's a specific type of weather spotter we're looking for. But if you're interested, make sure you check that out. We would love to hear from you, especially if you're in a part of Alaska that doesn't have a whole lot of weather reporting right now. That would be very helpful for us to do our job better, which in turn serves you even better. Here's a look at the Twitter, and you can always go to NWS Alaska, NWS Anchorage, NWS Juneau, or NWS Fairbanks if you'd like to post a picture. Perhaps you just returned from the road lottery or know someone that did. Share those pictures with us. We'd love to see what it looks like from your vantage point, from your part of Alaska. When you do that, make sure you use AKwx as a hashtag there. That tells us you're talking about Alaska weather. On YouTube, you'll get your daily afternoon map briefing around 4 o'clock or so. It's usually a sneak peek of the surface charts that you'll see here, which we'll get to in just a few moments. The hazardous weather outlook right now shows that high surf advisories are in effect from about Kivalina to Point Hope. Stronger southerly winds will be coming up, and we're watching for some minor beach erosion that could take place with a stronger southerly flow over the next couple days. The advisory is in effect right now. It'll go until about 10 o'clock tomorrow. As a result of that, though, watch for some very minor erosion, probably some higher surf than normal, and specifically from Kivalina to about Point Hope. That's from our friends at the National Weather Service Forecast Office in Fairbanks. As we look at the weather picture out across the Bering, you can see where some of this is coming from. A stronger southerly flow is already developing in the central and western parts of the Bering Sea. This is lifting northward, and on a stronger area of low pressure out to the west, we'll continue to see that very strong southerly flow for at least a day or two before high pressure starts to shift that eastward. For the last couple days, really last week or so, we've been under the influence of a very pronounced long wave trough of low pressure in the upper atmosphere. That's when you see the jet stream make a big U shape right across most of Alaska. That'll be over here in a few minutes when we see that. That's allowing that stronger southerly flow to develop out to the west, but it's kept most of the west coast, including Kivalina and Point Hope and Seward Peninsula and the YK, in more of a northerly and colder flow. It's allowed snow to fall across the interior in the Brooks Range and temperatures to drop into the single digits for Anaktuvuk Pass and areas out around Umiat. So it's been a pretty cold start. In fact, it's a little bit cooler than some earlier records there. Some places are seeing a very fast onset to winter, especially in the north and even around the Eielson Visitor Center, where we've seen a considerable amount of snow just in the last couple days, 10 inches on the ground, I think, over the course of the weekend. As you look at most of Alaska, you can see several areas of low pressure. One of those just across the central and eastern parts of the Gulf, firing up a little bit more convection. And in those areas, especially across southern sections just outside of the Dixon entrance, and tomorrow a little bit further north up the coast, there will be a chance for some isolated thunderstorms. Up across the north, you can see a large batch of clouds working in from northwest to south. And you can still see most of the west coast is under the influence of those north and westerly winds. Well, remember, we're talking about from Kivalina to Point Hope, looking at some stronger southerly winds. All of this is going to come racing northward as we get into the coming days. In the meantime, places caught in the middle would be south central, where the weather couldn't be finer, across the Matanuska and the Susitna Valleys, all up and down Cook Inlet, and for Kenai Peninsula and Prince William Sound. A little bit breezy at times. Wouldn't be surprised to see some occasional gusts over the next 24 hours in some of those gap wind prone areas. But save for that, the sky is clear and the temperatures are fallish indeed. As we look out across the west, you can see a boundary painted in red and blue. This is a stationary front representing the difference between cooler and drier air across the west coast of Alaska and the warmer and wetter air across the western Bering, wrapping around high pressure over the central Aleutians at 1,036 millibars. This is pretty stable stuff, and it doesn't really want to move very much, so it's guiding weather systems around it and keeping low clouds and moisture locked in across the southern Bering. In the meantime, it's also allowing colder air to drop in from the north, and as a result of that, we've got decreasing clouds across south central Alaska. We have cooler air working across the west coast and low pressure that's trying to work around the outside of this high pressure guide at 1,028 millibars across the north coast. Also across the eastern Gulf, 997 millibars. And remember, there's a possibility with a few thunderstorms located up closer to the coast surrounding this low pressure system. This will gradually send some of that convection northward as we head into tonight and tomorrow. So the opportunity is there. You'll notice the boundary out across the west does not shift a whole lot tonight. And along that, we could see areas of light rain and showers up across the western coast, maybe a little bit into the interior of the Seward Peninsula, a chance for some snow showers, and a scattering or even widely scattering of snow showers across the north and eastern interior tonight. That should be fairly minimal in its impact and across most of the interior at that. More clouds than anything else. South central is looking clear and cool, and you'll notice that pressure gradient that I like to talk about is kind of tightening up a little bit across the south and west. As a result of that, again, the winds may flow a little bit stronger, and especially in a gustier fashion for the north and western Gulf, and at times across the northern parts of southeast, and eventually across the areas around Kotzebue Sound, from Kivalina to Point Hope, and north of Amonuk to the Norton Sound region. Now, as we get into Wednesday, that warmer air is rushing eastward. Out ahead of that, the stronger southerly flow reaching into our places across the northern coast of Kotzebue Sound. Across the eastern parts of the interior, a few more clouds and a few snow showers scattered across the region. Again, the impacts look fairly minimal. Low pressure across the eastern Gulf at 1,001 millibars should provide another surge of moisture running up through southeast. There might be a lightning strike or two along the coastal areas tomorrow. High pressure across the central chain at 1,035 millibars should keep fog in place across the northern and Bering coast from Unalaska to Nikolsky, and out west a little bit more of a warmer, rainier flow. Showers are possible there with warmer air slowly moving eastward into the west coast. The process will be slow. As we get into Thursday, though, things start to move a little bit faster. You'll notice warmer air rushing northward, and with that warm and wet air moving into the colder interior, it's a good recipe for at least a few snow showers and maybe some light accumulating snow across the western Brooks Range. We'll be watching that develop and give you more information tomorrow. Across south and western parts of Alaska, a better chance for rain there with a flow coming mainly out of the due west. Cooler air is dropping southward, but slowly, and another surge behind that could add a little extra kick to it as that gets ashore later in the week. Out across the eastern Gulf, 1,000 millibar low sitting just south of the Dixon entrance will keep the showers going across parts of southeast. And again, there could be an opportunity for an isolated thunderstorm or lightning strike there. So just keep your eyes on this weather situation as we go toward the end of the week. Right now, this seems to be drifting southward. And across the eastern interior from Fairbanks to the Kenai Peninsula and just about to Kodiak Island, there's a decent chance you'll have a relatively clear sky for Thursday. Kodiak Island may be just on the western side of that cloud line, so it might get lucky and might get a little bit closer to you for a nicer day toward the end of the week. Here's a look at temperatures across the region today. Upper 40s and lower 50s we're seeing across a large part of southeast. Juneau had a pleasant day in the 50s. Upper 40s for places like Ketchikan and a little bit further south toward Annette. Temperatures in the lower 50s there. 48 in Hyder, 59 in Yakutat. Mid-50s for Prince William Sound. A gorgeous day in Valdez at 55. 49 in Anchorage, 51 in Kenai and Homer. 52 for Seward. About the same in Talkeetna today. The color's still amazing out there. 36 around the Matanuska Glacier up the road in Golcana. It was 48. Around Fairbanks, 38 degrees. 36 in Eagle. 34 for Fort Yukon today. A cool start in Anaktuvuk Pass in the single digits, making it up to 23 by the afternoon. 28 in Arctic Village. The Arctic coast saw temperatures in the upper 20s and lower 30s. A few places just struggling above the freezing point today. Kaktovik, not one of them. Mid-30s for Kivalina, actually lower 30s for Kivalina at 31 degrees, 37 in Point Hope, and 36 for Kotzebue, with Shishmaref showing just shy of 40 degrees this afternoon. It was 37 in Nome, 36 in Unalakleet. Galena had 38, 39 around Grayling, as well as McGrath. Bethel had 40 degrees, 46 in Nunivak Island, and 43 for Gamble. Across southwest and Bristol Bay, we saw temps in the mid-40s. Lake Iliamna also at 46. down the Alaska Peninsula coastline. Most villages were in the mid-40s this afternoon. Kodiak made it up to 51. Mid-40s for St. Paul and St. George, and lower 50s for Shemya, Adak, and Atka, coming in at 52. For southeast, we saw temperatures in the lower 40s for tonight. South Central is looking at most areas going at or just below the freezing point, so watch for more frost in the morning. Upper 20s for the Middle Tanana Valley and Fairbanks. Mid-20s for the Arctic coast. Above the freezing point for Nome tonight. Southwestern coastal areas mainly in the lower 30s around the extreme western parts of the YK Delta. Into Bristol Bay, you'll see temperatures dropping into the upper 20s. In the Alaska Peninsula and the chain in the 40s to 50 degrees with highs tomorrow, not changing much for you. Nunivak Island makes it up to 47, 43 in Nome, 34 in Barrow with lower 40s around the Middle Tanana Valley, and Fairbanks, South Central, closing in on 50 degrees. Many locations will be just below that. Kodiak might reach it, and lower to mid-50s for parts of southeast, with King Salmon and Dillingham back in the mid-40s. Flying weather shows much improved visibility across a large part of the western sections of Alaska. Southeast still struggling to get away from that low pressure system. And again, a lightning strike or two can't be ruled out. Across the Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island, Nunivak Island, and the central chain, IFR conditions should be expected, but most passes across Alaska will not reach IFR tomorrow. Anaktuvuk Pass and Adigan Pass are both expected to see MVFR conditions through a large part of the day. There may be improvement late in the day. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass look to be VFR. Same goes for Rainy Pass, and for Windy Pass, we expect it to turn over to VFR throughout the day. Isabel Pass expecting to see some improvements throughout your Wednesday. Starting at MVFR and lasting all day, probably Mentasta. MVFR conditions there, but Tanita Pass looks to see VFR conditions throughout most of your Wednesday. Portage Pass looks pretty good. It might be blustery at times, but VFR conditions should be expected. And the same goes for Chilkoot and White Pass, with most of the precipitation just to the west. Freezing levels show the cold air is certainly taking charge of most of the 49th state, with warmer air invading aloft out across the Bering Strait, with levels there reaching toward Point Hope and Kivalina at 2,000 feet, and as far south as the chain, levels are as high as 12,000 feet. There is also some cooler air massing across the eastern part of the Gulf of Alaska. Icing potential is there. You saw that westerly wind pushing in across the Bering Sea, but most of these levels are well above 10,000 feet to really run into solid light icing potential. Most of that will stretch from the Chukchi Seacoast all the way down the Seward Peninsula to the YK Delta, also towards Sand Point and westward to just about Unalaska there, above 10,000 feet. Here's the jet stream, and remember that U-shape I was talking about. This is that strong trough that has been controlling all of the weather for the Gulf of Alaska at this point. This is slowly sliding eastward, and high pressure out across the west is slowly building in. Now, it's not going to take over the entire weather picture, but it's kind of nudging this thing out of the way for just a little while. So you'll notice the wind speed's picking up to about 80 to 120 knots. Below that at 9,000 feet, you can see that broad northwesterly flow still in charge at this level, with winds from 15 to about 35 knots, a little bit stronger west of the Gulf of Anadyr into eastern Asia. And we have a southwesterly wind coming off the Brooks Range, controlling most of the north coast, with a weak area of low pressure across the Gulf, guiding in south and easterly winds for the Panhandle, and high pressures trying to take charge just south of Adak and Atka. At 3,000 feet, you see a little bit of a dip in this pattern. The northwesterly winds kick into southwesterlies as they come ashore, 10 to 20 knots there, with stronger winds west and south of Gamble. Low pressure across the eastern Gulf, controlling more of the area over the Gulf of Alaska, and that means the northerly winds here are a little bit stronger, 35 to 45 knots. Winds are fairly light across the interior and coming in from the north and northwest across the central chain at 20 to 25 knots. So for now, there's not a whole lot of turbulence potential, but do watch for those gap winds across most of the southwest, Prince William Sound, and occasionally a few spots across the Panhandle. We'll be watching for widespread turbulence potential to reach the light, maybe even isolated moderate, throughout the afternoon and into tomorrow, below 4,000 feet for Kotzebue Sound, the Chukchi Sea, as well as the western part of the Seward Peninsula, the Pribilofs, St. Matthew Island waters, and the western chain. And again, most of that's going to be below 4,000 feet. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back with some more updates on the sea ice growing across the north coast, as well as the rest of your marine forecast. Stay tuned.
This message is in support of the 2005 NOAA Safe Sanctuaries exercise. This is only a drill.
Emergency
emergency responders continue to address environmental impacts
from the 800-foot container ship aground on Elbow Reef in the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary.
Every year, NOAA responds to thousands of natural and human-induced incidents threatening life, property, and natural resources. During such incidents, NOAA is mandated to protect natural resources, provide weather data, and chart navigable waterways. To better fulfill this mission, NOAA conducted the first Safe Sanctuaries exercise in April of 2005 to bring together NOAA resources and expertise with other agencies for a hypothetical oil spill in the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary.
Briefly, the situation is, as we know, the EMP worthless trader went aground on the Elbow. It's currently leaking fuel, and there's also a secondary release.
The Elbow is an outlying reef in the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary. This marine protected area is one of 13 marine sanctuaries and one coral reef ecosystem reserve in the United States. The Florida Keys is the nation's only living barrier coral reef. This exercise highlights NOAA's finest in emergency response and demonstrates its wide array of assets and capabilities. Under the Oil Pollution Act, the U.S. Coast Guard assumes the lead authority to direct an emergency response in the marine environment as the federal on-scene coordinator. In a significant incident such as this, the on-scene coordinator calls upon a cadre of specialists from around the country and assembles them in an incident command post, in this case, the Monroe County Emergency Response Center. Key among them is NOAA's Scientific Support Coordinator, who serves as a science advisor to the on-scene coordinator. For this exercise, the NOAA coordinator leads the environmental unit that will orchestrate the delivery of data and observations acquired from NOAA scientists and others. Among the initial information needed for the response is figuring out where the leaking oil is headed. The Scientific Support Coordinator dispatches an oceanographer to make real-time observations of ocean currents and oil movement at the grounding site.
Do you know if it's the north end or the south end where you're going to be dropping? Northwest end.
She does this by dropping biodegradable dye pellets from the helicopter and photographs the dispersal of the dye.
90, 25.
I'm away. That's great sun angle. It's hard to see it though, I think.
This green dye mimics oil and gives the oceanographer an accurate view of sea surface currents.
Okay, got what I need.
When she returns, she immediately reports the information to the Scientific Support Coordinator in the Incident Command Post. They combine these observations with others in the environmental unit who have been working around the clock to respond to the oil spill.
There's this eddy right here.
As soon as the spill was reported, the Scientific Support Coordinator also requested a team from the Center for Operational Oceanographic Products and Services.
Got a counter pin for that, right?
Working with the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary staff, they assembled and deployed a quick response buoy to collect real-time data at the wreck site. Using sound waves, this acoustic Doppler current profiling package measures ocean currents throughout the water column and transmits that information via satellite and radio straight into the command post.
Well, and that's what we're showing here. We got 3 times the knot measured.
Other team members monitor a pair of surface current mapper stations that were installed along the coast. These towers broadcast and receive high-frequency radio waves along the sea surface and provide another measurement of the surface currents, but on a wider scale. Process signals are also uplinked via satellite to the command post. The data from the surface current stations and current profiling buoy are verified with the aerial observations made on site by the oceanographer.
I don't see anything that would indicate that, but I'm trying to think of, would I have seen it if it was there?
It might have been the water is so clear.
But more data are available and needed. The oceanographer also teams up with a meteorologist from the National Weather Service. He is a warning coordination meteorologist, and hourly he receives 2 critical updates on weather forecasts. One comes from NOAA's Weather Forecast Office in Key West.
Unlike yesterday with the true east direction that we might have expected, it looks like the models are indicating that it might be more of an east-northeast by early afternoon hours.
These are the local experts who understand the daily weather patterns in the Florida Keys and can make the most sense out of the information coming from NOAA satellites, radar, and their own observations. During a sensitive event such as an oil spill, the Key West office also dispatches an incident meteorologist dedicated to monitoring the weather specifically on the wreck site. With assistance from the sanctuary, the incident meteorologist installed a real-time monitoring system on the nearest accessible platform to the grounding site. This instrument transmits real-time observations of wind speed, wind direction, and temperature back to a small satellite dish that was set up in the Field Operations Center in Key Largo. With the most current data and frequent observations, the incident meteorologist prepares the second source of updates for the warning coordination meteorologist in the command post.
I have a forecast here ready to go. That's what I was just coordinating with the with your office there, and I can go ahead and send that to you in the next 10-15 minutes.
Integrating all the field data, the meteorologist presents the most current forecast back to the environmental unit. With all the real-time information now in hand, the Scientific Support Coordinator and Oceanographer contact NOAA's Scientific Support Team in Seattle, Washington.
Hey Tom, this is Debbie and Brad and Matt here.
Hey there.
Hey there.
Hey Bushy.
Mark Miller, CJ, and Bushy here on the War.
At the vessel site, we did a die drop, and the currents were about 0.6, 0.7 of a knot to the north.
The team in Seattle will now work quickly to compile all the available data in computer programs and build a trajectory model for where the oil is expected to go. At least twice per day, the Seattle team updates the trajectory model. This critical information is faxed to the command post and delivered immediately to the Scientific Support Coordinator. Whenever there is new information available, the Scientific Support Coordinator and other NOAA specialists brief the Unified Command. The Unified Command is the lead group in the command post, composed of the sanctuary manager, the state and federal on-scene coordinators, and the responsible party for the ship grounding. The Unified Command and the planning unit will use the latest trajectory model and other information to best direct the course of field operations for the response.
Yeah, I can do that too, just point and talk into a mic. When you look at the sea ice edge, you can see over time in the last week or so, we've had an expanding area of new ice. A lot of the open water that's well offshore, we were talking about some of the new ice growing last week around 350 nautical miles north of Barrow. Well, this area is closing in slowly and surely, but temperatures are dropping fairly quickly there too. And if you look really carefully here, west of Prudhoe Bay, you can see new ice forming. This is ice that forms in the nighttime, and last week it was melting away. Now it's not melting away. So there is new ice forming around the Beaufort Seacoast at this point, and this was the latest analysis today from our sea ice experts. You can always check this out and see what they have to say about it and their 5-day outlook as well as seasonal outlooks at weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php. Here's the weather for Southeast. You'll notice the winds coming up a little bit more across some of the inner channels and the coastal areas as we get into Wednesday and Thursday. Winds still fairly light across the inside, around 10 to 15 knots. The outside looking at a south and easterly wind from 15 to 20 knots with 6 to 7 foot seas. Once we get into Thursday, though, low pressures drop just enough south that it's starting to drag a little more wind with it. So we have 15 to 20 knots across the inside. And once you get into the Clarence Strait, that's a stronger easterly wind at 25 knots with a 6-foot sea. And offshore winds are blowing now from 20 to 25 knots at their strongest with seas to 6 to 8 feet south of Sitka for Thursday. For South Central, higher gusts should be expected out of the Copper River Basin and across parts of the Barren Islands, where we could see winds there upwards of 30 to 35 knots sustained, 20 to 25 knots coming out of Prince William Sound, 4 to 6 foot seas there at their height, and 8-foot seas expected in Cook Inlet with northerlies at 25 knots, northwesterlies coming off Kodiak Island with a 7-foot sea blowing into the western Gulf. Now winds should settle down a little bit more into Thursday, and you'll notice east and northerly wind developing in the northern parts of Cook Inlet, north and westerly winds coming across the Barrens at 20 knots, more of a variable wind setting up during the day, winds switching around to more of a northwesterly direction for for Shelikof at 10 knots there by the end of the day, and winds settle down inside of Prince William Sound at 10 knots with a 2-foot sea. For the Alaska Peninsula, northwesterlies will be the predominant direction at 15 to 25 knots. The strongest, though, from Castle Cape to Chignik at 30 knots with an 8-foot sea on Wednesday. By Thursday, look for a west and northwesterly wind coming across 20 to 25 knots in most areas. Again, stronger winds south and east of Chignik with a 5-foot sea there, 8-foot seas north of Cold Bay along the Bering Sea coast. For Wednesday in the Aleutians, look for a west and northwesterly flow, 15 to 25 knots from Nikolsky to Unalaska, and winds a little bit stronger from the southeast tomorrow. From Kiska to Attu, look for 7 to 10-foot seas. Those come up to 25 knots as we get into Thursday. South and westerly winds from Unalaska to Atka at 20 to 25 knots there. 5 to 7-foot seas on the Pacific side and 6 to 8-foot seas along the Bering side, with seas coming up to 10 to 11 feet across Kiska to Attu as we get into Thursday. Now for the west coast, south and westerly winds will continue there. Remember, we've got that stronger southerly flow that's going to creep northward fairly quickly. Look for a 25 to 30 knot wind across the northern Bering and westerlies developing across the Pribilofs, becoming southwesterly closer to the mainland. As we get into Thursday, the winds are still holding around 25 to 30 knots in the north and 20 knots across the Kuskokwim Bay and the Pribilofs with a 5 to 8-foot sea there for Thursday. Remember, we have a high surf advisory from Kivalina to Point Hope. That's in effect now and will go into most of Thursday with 25 to 35 knot winds coming in from the south. That could mean some minor beach erosion and some rougher surf in those areas. 6 to 7-foot seas on the order for Wednesday, with south and easterly winds coming off the Beaufort and the Chukchi Sea coast from 10 to as high as 25 knots. For Thursday, we have even stronger winds off of Point Hope and Cape Lisburne, up to 40 knots there with a 10-foot sea. Southwesterlies coming into the areas outside of Kotzebue Sound from Kivalina to Point Hope. That could be 25 knots with a 6-foot sea. Otherwise, southerlies will be strong in the west, and south and southeasterly winds holding around 25 knots with seas from 5 to 8 feet. 10 to 12 feet across the Chukchi Sea coast for Thursday. Recapping tonight's weather, a stronger westerly push of wind will work its way in through the Bering Strait. That's the winds that you just saw across the North Slope and Kotzebue Sound. Drier air is sitting across south central and southwest. We have a chance for a few thunderstorms along the outer coast of southeastern Alaska, and widely scattered snow showers will continue to creep out of eastern Alaska as another surge of colder air drops in toward the end of the week with a better chance of rain in the south. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.